Hey everybody, I'm Julian with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, How to Create an Office 365 Clone with DevExpress MVC, presented by Technical Evangelist Don Wibier and Web Program Manager Mehul Harry. Well, at least that was the plan in theory. It seems that Los Angeles is currently having its first rainfall in many months, and the traffic is all snarled up, and Mehul is snarled up in it. So join Don to learn how to create an MVC version of the new DXDocs demo. This demo includes CMS-like functionality and integrates powerful DevExpress controls like the Spreadsheet, rich text editor, file manager, upload control, and more. Don will show you how to migrate a powerful DevExpress WebForms application to ASP.NET MVC. Now, this session is being recorded, and it will be available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We'll also do a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. Just type your questions in your GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. We have a couple of people in the background, so questions may be answered during the presentation as well. I will now hand things over to Don. Hello, Don.
Hi, Julian. Thanks for this nice introduction. And yeah, there is a slight change of plan, so I have to improvise just a bit, but we'll do fine. So yeah, we're gonna take a look at the WebForms application that we ship as a demo, which is our DXDocuments demo. And Mehul and I already did a webinar a couple of months back about how this application has been architected and how we have set this application up. So I will give you like a real quick introduction on how this demo works, how it looks, and then we're going to take a look what's involved in changing this over into an MVC version. So let me first start up the application. And well, as soon as you run this application, oh, and let me point out that it is installed in the demos folder. I'll point that out later. So once we have started up the application, you'll see a Office 365 kind of application, which will display folders and files. It gives us the opportunity to filter the documents based on, for instance, I want to see all documents that I've created. I want to see all documents that have been changed recently. I can also filter on rich text documents or spreadsheet files. And this application, we have set this application up to be like a real-world application. So we have included some membership facilities. As you can see on the top right corner, this is Ben Stevenson logged onto the system with his avatar in place, and yeah, we can sign out, we can sign on again, etc. So this is what we're going to rebuild in this webinar. One thing I'll show you is that this one is not working. So I'll switch back. Yeah, so this is basically the application that we will be transforming into an MVC version. And the application has been architected, which we explained in the previous webinar, in a service-oriented approach. So that means that we are able to use most of the application logic straight into the MVC version as well. But before we go into Visual Studio, let me point out what we need to change over. So we have the visual overview here of the main page of this application. And there are a number of DevExpress controls in the WebForms version, which we also have available in the MVC extensions as well. So let me point out which controls we are dealing with. On the top center of the page, we have a menu, an action menu, which allows us to perform certain actions on folders or files, like uploading, deleting, creating, etc. On the top right side, we have the user menu, which shows us who we are, and it gives us the possibility to sign out of the application. On the left side, we have a filter menu, and the filter menu does something very interesting, which I will point out in a second, because the main content area of this page contains a callback panel, and this callback panel hosts a file manager control. And to get back to the filter menu, the interesting part of this application, or at least of this page, is that when I click one of the items in the filter menu, it will cause the file manager to change file system provider. And what that means is the following. So let me switch back to the application. And what you see here in the current view, I have selected the all link in the filter menu, and it will show me folders and files. So I can just click on one of the folders and it will display its subfolders and files. But once I click on any of the other ones, for instance, I want to see all my documents, you'll notice that the folders has disappeared. So what we now have, we have switched over the file system provider to a searchable file system provider, which will not do the folders and the subfolders anymore, but it will just display all my files in the entire file system. And to get back to the slide deck, that is the reason that we are hosting this file manager control inside the callback panel. Because the file manager has its own callback mechanisms, but that doesn't allow us to change file system providers. So what we do is we will perform a callback on this panel, which will cause the file manager to change its file manager provider. So those are a couple of interesting things on this page, and yeah, that is something that we need to take care of in the MVC version. So to get this application up and running with the MVC framework, there are a couple of steps involved. The first thing would be, well, obviously we'll create a new application, an MVC application, and we copy over all the assets like images, JavaScript, and CSS. And I'd rather not touch any of the JavaScript or CSS or whatsoever. I would like to leave that all the same, because that should be possible. So let's see if that's possible. The next step will be the conversion of the WebForms markup into Razor views. Because we are dealing with an MVC application, we want to use the Razor markup, and this is quite a bit of work because we have to change over all the WebForms controls into the MVC extensions of DevExpress. And yeah, that's one of the steps that needs to be done. And furthermore, we need to change over some code behind of the WebForms application, because in MVC we do not have code behind anymore, and yeah, that code behind functionality has to be provided by the models now. So that will, that requires a bit of change. And yeah, the last thing is that we can change a couple of minor details because we are now running on the MVC framework, and a couple of things can be done slightly different, and we're going to do that as well. So to get back to that code behind, so the previous step, I would like to point out a bit more of it. So what you will see in the WebForms application is that we have quite a bunch of events coded in, which will do some additional styling during the page rendering. But with MVC, we do not have events like page init, page load, and other events during page composition. So we have to figure out another way. What we do have in MVC is we have models. So what we should do is we should change over that behavior which is now coded in those page events. That should be done by the model properties and the view bindings and maybe a couple of HTML helper methods. So I'm going to show you how we can do that. So we will still have the same business logic in the application, but it will be processed differently. So because of the time that we have for this webinar, I have prepared a bit of things already, and that is to save up just a bit of time. So let me get over to Visual Studio and show you what I have prepared already. I have created an empty MVC application by using the DevExpress template gallery. And for everybody who hasn't seen that before, that is just a matter of clicking File, New Project. And if we go to the C# section, we'll have the DevExpress template gallery. Well, if you follow the steps in the gallery, you will end up with like an empty MVC application. At least that's the step that I selected. And I've done a couple of more things for this application. If I quickly switch back to my slide deck, the things that I have prepared already are the first two steps. So I have already copied over all assets, including images, JavaScript, and CSS. And I have also converted the WebForms markup into Razor views because that was quite a bit of work. And I will show you what I've been doing already. But you'll notice that it is quite an amount of work getting that all together. So I've prepared it for you, but we'll get into it a bit and I'll explain a bit some interesting parts of it. What I also did in this solution is I have included our demo project. So what you see in the Solution Explorer is the documents with a little globe, and this is our demo application, our WebForms demo application. The reason that I did that is because I can put a couple of files side by side on the screen and I can point out a couple of differences and a couple of things next to each other. So I'll collapse it right now and I'll go into the MVC project quite fast right now. So I copied over all the assets of the site. So that means that I've copied over the images folder. Let me collapse this project as well. So I've got the content and I've got the images copied over. I have the scripts copied over. Well, there are a couple of scripts being included with the MVC wizard. But the most important one that we will be needing is this one, the site.js. And it has all the events with all the controls that we'll need. So I just copied that over. What I furthermore did is, I copied over a number of views already. But I'll get to that in a minute. So let me first start with the master page of the application. And for that, I'll open up the WebForms version. Here we have a master page, which is the site.master. And, well, we need to get that into the MVC or into the Razor engine as well. So what I did, I went all the way down to my MVC project, and there is located a shared folder in the views folder, which has a layout CHTML. And I'll open that one up as well, and I can now put them next to each other. And what you'll see here is there are a couple of things which are interesting. So we've got a couple of meta tags inside the head section, which specifies a number of things depending on mobile devices. But most important, we have a reference to the style sheet, and we have a reference to the JavaScript file. And in the body section, we have a content placeholder. So once you run the MVC project template of DevExpress, it will render in a number of style sheets that we will need to give our controls the look and feel that we want. It will also need a number of scripts for the client-side API to function properly on the DevExpress MVC extensions. So the only thing that I did here is I commented out a number of scripts and style sheets because I know we are not be using these controls. So this will make the rendering of the page a bit quicker. And for the rest, you'll see that I copied over everything exactly the same without any special tricks. I included the style sheet and I included the JavaScript file. And instead of a content placeholder with Razor, we'll have a render body method, which will do the similar trick as the content placeholder. So that is our first conversion. So another thing that I would like to point out, and I didn't show that in the demo that was already running. So let me run this demo again. By making it a startup project. What you'll notice is that we are normally forced, let me close down the entire browser screen. You need to be signed on to this documents demo. And this is basically the first step I'm going to set up in MVC. So once I'm signed on, I'll get access to the system. Well, the way that automatic login feature works in the WebForms application is if I open up the web.config of the WebForms application, we'll have a section which is called authorization. And this means that we are only allowing identified users to this application. So if you're an unidentified user, you will be redirected to the form which is specified here. And this is all standard WebForms behavior. So we're going to do the same in MVC, but I'm going to do it on a slightly different way because we can do that in MVC on a very nice way. But before we can do that, let's set up the logon page. So we have that one in place. Well, for that, we will start with a logon controller, which I already created, but it is pretty much empty. And what you'll see, well, what we can basically do is if I switch over to the WebForms version and I sign out, there are basically a couple of things that the model which is needed for the logon controller, there are a couple of properties needed. One will be the username, another one will be the password, and we also have something in case I enter something else, which is like an error message. So if I enter an unknown username, we'll get an error message here as well. So this is basically as simple as our logon model could look. And again, I'm gonna do one thing slightly different, but I'll get to that in a minute. So if I go to my models folder, I already created the models, but they're empty. So here I have the logon model, and as I mentioned, the model can be as simple as the following. An account name, a user password, and an error text. And the error text is necessary to get error information back, like if the validation fails on the server. And well, this logon controller also needs a view to display this information and process the information. So let me go to the views folder, and again, there is already a logon view available, and that is something that I have already prepared. So before I open that file up, let me show the logon file in the WebForms demo. What you'll see here is that we are using a form layout control, which I like very much because it saves you quite a bunch of work creating a nice looking form with all kinds of controls, groups, etc., etc. And we do have this one as an MVC extension available as well. But that means that you need to configure that MVC extension with all the properties specified here. So that is quite a bit of stuff. So what I did, if I switch back to my MVC project, I have done that already. So here we have the form layout extension, and this is the way all of our MVC extensions work. So we call this MVC extension method, in this case the form layout, and it receives a configuration object which is coded out here. But as I mentioned, it is quite a bit of work, which I already prepared because we only have an hour for this webinar. So it is basically the same as the markup, but then in the MVC configuration object. I did comment out a number of things here, and those are things which can be handled slightly different in MVC as well, because the username box has some validation on it, and in the WebForms version we have used the regular expression and the required field validation, which is inside this editor. But also recently Mehul and I did a webinar on unobtrusive JavaScript validation on MVC, so why just not use that? And to do so, it is quite nice because what I can do on the model, so this form will be bound to the logon model. So if I switch back to the model, we were talking about the account name. So I can now put in a required attribute, and this makes the account name field required. We also had a regular expression validation in place, so it should not contain, it should not be any spaces or whatsoever. So let me put a second attribute on top of this account name one, which is a regular expression validation. And these two lines will do the same as the code that I commented out in the form layout extension. So with this in place, we have the logon page set up. And before we can test that, I'm going to go back to the home controller because we want to test that out on the home controller. So what I did in the home controller, again, a number of methods are already in place because yeah, that is necessary for the home controller, and we'll get to this code a bit later. The most important thing for now is that the index action method will be decorated with an attribute, and that is also something which differs from the WebForms version. So in the WebForms version, we had in the web.config, we had the authorization section. But with MVC, we can do that a bit nicer. We can decorate this action method with an attribute, which is called authorize. And this causes basically the same to happen as the WebForms version, except you can specify this per action method. So if you want to access this index action method, you need to be logged onto the system. I did need to make a small change in the web.config on the MVC project though. So if I go over to the web.config, you'll notice that we have commented out the authorization section because we're going to use the attributes for it. And the other thing that I changed was the logon URL. Because it was the logon controller, the URL will be logon. So with these two things in place, we could start up the MVC application, and what you'll notice in a minute, let me make it start a project. What you'll notice once it starts up, it's now trying to access the index method inside the home controller, but since we are not logged on to the system, we will be redirected to the logon page. I do get an error message here, and the reason for that is that I didn't copy in some of the things, but we'll get to that in a second. So if I switch over to the logon to the view, now let me quickly check the logon model. So this one is okay. I probably didn't rebuild the application properly. Let me quickly check if that's okay, and that will be okay. And let me also quickly check the logon view to see if that is in place. Yeah, that looks all pretty cool to me. And yeah, that should do the trick. So let me test it one more time, and otherwise we'll continue. With the rest of the application. Okay, we'll get to this issue a bit later. I probably didn't copy over all the required things, but it's no big deal. We'll manage to get the rest of the application running in seconds. All right, so with this in place, we can actually take a look at the home controller, because the home controller and the home model and the home view is quite interesting, because let us first get back to the WebForms application. If I go to the default ASPX, then we'll see quite a bit of markup here, but for one of the steps in the agenda, remember we had like we have to change over code behind into a different approach in the model, or with bindings, or with HTML helper methods. So for that to happen, we need to figure out what's inside the code behind of the home page. And what you see is that, well, most of the things are not really difficult to grasp, because a lot of functionality is put inside this document or service-oriented approach. So we have this documents app which will keep track of the state of the application, and it will keep track of the state of the user as well. So we'll have a reference to that, and a lot of things what's happening here is depending on this documents app. The only thing which is slightly different is that we will load in the file manager control dynamically inside this callback panel. And well, this is obviously something which is not possible in MVC and Razor as well. So we need to deal with this on a different way. We've got a little method which determines what file system provider we need to create depending on the selected action menu item. And we have a prepare user menu which will populate the user menu depending on the current user. But what you'll see is that we will use the documents application object again to access the user, to get the avatar. So that saves us quite some work, because we can use this approach directly in the MVC version as well. And the last thing here is we've got a document app.user.signout, which will sign us off from the application. then we also need to take a look at the other control that I already pointed out here, because this is something which will hold some code behind as well. And we should take a look at that before we can figure out how our model should look. So here is the code behind of the document browser. And what you'll see is that there are quite a bunch of configuration things being done on the file manager control, depending on certain things inside this application object from our service-oriented approach. And a number of CSS classes are being added depending on certain scenarios. And again, there are quite a bit of item template init events which will change things like background images inside CSS, and it will add classes depending on certain conditions. And all this stuff needs to be transformed into a model which we could use to get the same approach in our application. So I've taken a good look for you to all these events, and I've taken a good look to what's actually happening here. And I noticed a couple of things. So if I switch over to the home model, so let me see, the model is here. I have sorted out that there are basically a number of properties inside this home model which are the most important ones, and depending on those properties, certain other properties can be set or get another value, or which makes it all together into a model which we can use to bind the file manager to. And the properties that are basically the most important ones, which determine the basic look and feel of this file manager, are obviously a reference to the documents application object. A file system provider should be created somewhere in the process which we can use with our file manager extension. And furthermore, there are a number of properties. If there is a filter applied, we need a panel name which is used in the application to display the folder which is currently being looked at, and two other properties like the filter name and the source name. And to make the application a bit more explaining, I have included a number of properties, and don't get scared, because there are actually quite a bunch. I'll put them on top of these ones. Here you go, and I'll explain all of these properties. So these properties, for instance, are a collection of action menu items. So if I switch back to the application, I was signed out here. So let me sign in again. So these menu items are now a property of the model, so we can bind that menu to that property which holds the menu items. The same goes for the filter. That was the filter menu. I'm sorry. The same for the action menu, which was on top of the file manager, and the user menu items. So we can bind these properties to those menu extensions, and we'll be all set. And what you'll notice furthermore is that I've included even CSS classes settings of the file manager, like show upload panel, max file size, and these properties are all depending on the first properties that I just pasted in. So that's also why they're only read-only. And what happens if I now switch over to the home view, in this case the view is empty, And that was because I wanted to show you the empty view. But I will now copy in some of the code which is required, some Razor code, which is required to display the page. So again, don't get too scared because it is quite a bit. But then again, there are quite a number of controls involved in this view. And if I get the WebForms version together, then you'll notice that there is quite a bit of resemblance. So it looks like a lot, but I mean, this is the home page of the WebForms version, but it's got a lot of markup as well. And if I put them next to each other, and I'll scroll this one a bit up to the side, you will see that I will start with a div with a class main page, which is basically the same as here. And the next thing will be we're rendering out a DevExpress panel with all the properties and stuff and the content, etc., etc. So that is what I'm rendering out here. And again, I've done all the changeover from the markup into the configuration object, and I'm rendering in exactly the same information for all the controls that are on the markup. So don't get scared if you see this configuration object. It does basically the same as the other one, the WebForms version. There are obviously a number of things which are interesting to point out because I created this model, and if I go all the way to the top and I'll search for a model, then you will see that I have this DevExpress menu extension, and I am using the model.filter menu items to populate this menu. And here there is only, let me remove that column, or that comma. So if I search further, then here we have the user settings menu, and I'm using the model again, and I'll use the user menu items property to populate that menu. So here you will have a view which is bound to properties of this specific model. And I'll go even further, so I'm populating all the menu items of all the menus in the application. And this is basically the bindings which are happening in the main page. But obviously we'll render in this file manager control as well, which is happening right here. So to keep the structure exactly the same, I will first render in that callback panel which is hosting the file manager control. And the callback panel partial is only holding the code for the callback panel, and that is something which is important with the DevExpress MVC extensions, because if we have complex controls or complex extensions which will have their own callback mechanism, you should put them in a separate partial and put them only in a partial, no other code involved. And what I'll do here is I will render in the partial which will hold the document browser. The document browser will have a little panel on top of it. It will have the menu, the action menu, and it will render in a file manager partial again. Because the file manager has its own callback mechanism, I have put it in a partial view as well. And here you'll have a pretty good overview of the properties of the model, because the model which is used on this view is still the home model. So if I search for model, then you'll see that I have bind all kinds of properties which are, depending on certain aspects. I'm just binding those configuration properties to the model properties. And this is how you can transform your WebForms application into an MVC one. And as you can see in the highlighted section, I have quite a bunch of properties, and I can do model binding straight away because I have composed that model in this way. And then things got a bit tricky while I was preparing this demo because the file we are using inside the file manager, we are using templates to render the contents. And also those templates have some conditional markup depending on certain situations. So to get that all sorted out, what I did, I created an additional file manager helper model, which is more or less like a data transformation object, which does the same trick. It helps me sort out all the properties and tags that are depending on certain criteria of the current state of the application. And if you take a look at that model, I put it in here already. It looks quite a bit, but the only thing that I am doing is I am setting all those properties in the constructor of this simple object. Here it is. And I'm making sure that I will mimic the event which was used in the WebForms version. I'm doing that with this object, so I can bind that template again to this kind of object, and I'm sure that everything is rendered out the same as the WebForms application. And so what you see is I use it on quite a number of occasions because I have to set that item template content. In WebForms we had like a template where we could render in some markup. In MVC we have to use this set item template content method, where this method will be executed for every item. So yeah, this is one way of approaching this this WebForms mechanism that we don't have anymore. And some templates are a bit more advanced as others. But if we if we have put this all together, I should be able to run the application, which I will. So let me compile it quickly. Okay, so now the logon is working as well, and you can notice that this is the MVC version because it doesn't have the ASPX here anymore. But it is behaving exactly the same. It is now using our MVC extensions, and once I sign in, you will see that this application is looking exactly the same as the one in the WebForms version. And there are a couple of smaller things which I will point out, because what we need to do here is once I click this item, a callback is being performed, which should change the index, the home controller to switch file system provider. So how did I do that? I stepped over that quite fast, but if I go back to Visual Studio, I also didn't point out what the home controller should look like. So in this case, the home controller is quite empty. I should set up that model. I stepped over that pretty fast. So I should create one of those models which should be bound to the view that we're displaying. So how can that be done? let me create such a model in this action method. And it will have two additional methods. And I copied both of them virtually out of the WebForms version, which is a selected filter text, which is a small formatting function, which is not really exciting, but I'll paste it in, and you'll probably notice what it does. And the other one, I copied it out the WebForms application quite literally. I didn't make any changes as far as I remember, which is the create file system. Here is the thing, like, okay, how do we do that? The file system provider is being created and put in the file system provider property of this model, and the selected filter text is done as well. And once this model has been created, we can return this view and use the model that we just created. So with that in place, we have the initial view standing, because we are creating this model on the fly, and this model is depending, or the properties of the model are depending on this documents app instance, which we are passing in as well, the file system provider, etc., etc. And this will give us all the required code inside the model to be set up properly. But then the second step that we'll need to do is, once we click inside that filter, that action filter menu, we should do a perform callback on the callback panel, which allows us to switch over that file system provider. So for that, we would like to have the selected menu item of the filter menu being transformed to the server from the client, because it's depending on what you click. So what we basically would like to have is a method or a parameter inside this action method, which is called filtered. And if we would have that value, we could do something like the following. We could create this model again, just like the one on top. And I know we could optimize this code, but this is just for demo purposes. And in that case, we can return this partial view with the model. So this remains us with one question. How do we get that selected menu item inside this parameter? Well, that is something that I like very much on the MVC extension of the callback panel, because to make that happen, we need to add one line of code in the JavaScript of this application. So if I open up the JavaScript, there is a method here inside. I will not go through all of this code. It's a pretty well explanation. It will explain itself, and it's pretty well set up. There is one method which I'm interested right now, and that method is somewhere around here, where I put the to-do. This method has been executed once a perform callback on the callback panel has been called. And what we can do here is we can have the event arguments in this method has like one extra parameter, or one extra property actually, which is called the custom args. So if I add a line into this method, the custom args is a collection, is like a name value collection, and if I make this name the same as the one that I had in my home controller, it will be passed in as a parameter on this method. And I will fill this value with the filter menu .getSelectedItem.name. So this is a very nice trick of getting information from the client to the server into the correct action method and do something with it. And well, I coded the construction of the model already, and that is depending on the current filter, and the current filter is using that filtered parameter. You should always check whether it is not null, because if it is not passed in, it will be null, so you have to deal with it, and you can do it on this way. And because we are using this filtered parameter right now, we need to add it on a number of other methods as well. And that is the file manager partial, which is also a part of the file manager control, and it will get that parameter as well, and it will mean that we can actually execute the same construction of the model just like this. And then we have the file manager partial download, and it will also get that filtered parameter, and again it will have the same construction of the model. So yes, we could optimize this code, but I mean, for this demo, this is pretty okay. And then the only thing we need to change there is we will obviously use as a second parameter the file system provider. So with this in place, we are almost through the end of our webinar. So yeah, with this in place, you will have like a really good starting point on how to transform this application. And I mean, there are a couple of other things involved, obviously. And if you want to know how to do the trick with the editors, the spreadsheet editor and the rich text editor, well, it is basically the same approach as that I showed you. We need to transform the markup into the view, the Razor View code, and yeah, you have to construct a model in a way that you can apply those model properties on the properties of the MVC extensions. So yeah, with this in place, I'd like to ask Julian if there are like any questions left. Let me show you my contact details.
Well, a couple of things. We've been answering the questions, and Mehul joined us halfway through the webinar, well, a bit less than halfway through the webinar, so he's actually here online helping out in the background. So no, nothing to ask. Everything's been sorted.
All right. I do want to point out that this sample project is available on GitHub. I do notice that my GitHub account is not on this thank you page, but if you go to GitHub and search for my name, you will find my account, and the DX documents will be there. And you can just download it and play with it and see if it suits your needs. And let me know if you have any questions about it, obviously.
I've put a link down in one of the questions. If you'd like, just bring it up on a browser and people can see it as well. But Don will post a blog post afterwards with the link to the actual and a link to the YouTube video.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Check out devexpress.com/webinars for all upcoming webinars and to access previously recorded webinar sessions. And again, please note that today's webinar will also be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. The link is posted in the chat box. And that's it for this one. Thank you to Don and Mehul. Thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Goodbye for now.